So let's get started. Hello to everyone who's here so far, and happy 2021. I know so far it's kind of felt like an extended version of 2020, and I'd say we're pretty much on the verge of flipping a new year. So this is the first Vinguard forum that we're doing this year. It's on water, responsible wine production, the relationship of forest as a living ecosystem to water usage. And I'm absolutely thrilled to have Charlie Toledo from Suscol Intertribal Council and Steve Matthiasson of Matthiasson Wines joining me and the Vinguard here today. Just a few words before we get started with the discussion, and there's a lot to discuss, so I'm going to keep it really brief. In 2020, the Vinguard transitioned to become a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and our mission is to build a collaborative community in wine, centered around its Renew Wine program that uplifts and is driven by a diverse, multiracial representation of women and non-binary genders. So basically, we're trying to create a Green New Deal in the wine industry based on inclusion, education, and collaboration. And our most pressing projects right now are retooling parts of the wine industry equity and justice pledge. And we're doing this in concert with other organizations and wine professionals. So we're going to get started on that actually tomorrow. We did a revision that came out several months ago that was much more extensive than the original 2019 version. And as it's a living document and the times are changing quickly, we feel that we also need to right away start doing some retooling for this year. We're also creating a Renew Wine Industry worker handbook. It's a handbook that is both an employee handbook, but also best practices and social justice guide. So that's a pretty big project that we hope to get started on in the next month or so. Also, we are going to have other forums like this one. So if you're interested in finding out about them and you want to join our mailing list, just shoot an email to info@thevingard.com. And I'm going to paste a bunch of links into the chat in a few minutes. So don't worry about it if you haven't gotten everything there. So this particular forum has been months in the making, right? Literally, and then the holidays came up and everyone got busy. But I'm very glad that we were able to do it today. We did not plan on doing it on the very last day of the Trump regime / presidency. But at least it does serve as a reminder to us that environmental justice is social justice and that access to water and other resources is a human right. So with that, I want to introduce Charlie Toledo of Suscol Intertribal Council, and she can tell you much more about herself and everything she's done and about Suscol than I can. So Charlie, can you take it away?
Sure, thank you, Pamela. It's an honor to be on the first workshop ever, so I'm happy that you're pursuing this. I live in Napa Valley. I'm the director of Suscol Intertribal Council. We're a Native American organization, a community-based organization here in Napa Valley, but we address the issues of Indigenous visibility locally and globally. We're actually involved with Indigenous community around the world. Suscol was founded in 1972 and reorganized in 1992. Just to address the needs and then create visibility for the Native American community in this region of California. When we started in 1992, most people thought the Indians were all dead and still now referred to mostly in past tense, the romantic past. So our basis is a lot like the Vanguard, is education to include the Indigenous perspective. The tribal people were here for tens of thousands of years before the Euro invasions. And so I'll speak to that a little bit, but that's my introduction. I'm not going to talk about everything I do because that's a long talk, but I'm glad to have everybody join us this afternoon. Thank you.
Sure. And Steve, your turn.
Okay, so we're a small family winery here in Napa, and we originally, before we got into wine or got into any of this stuff, Jill and I were really passionate about organic farming and sustainability, when we were in college, and wanted to find some way to do that in our careers. And Jill worked for years for a family farming nonprofit, and I, studied agriculture and organic farming. And so, but it's interesting you say, Pamela, that just in the last year or two, you're already doing revisions on the pledge because things are changing so fast, and so we have this sort of long history in our lives of organic farming and sustainability, and I've tried to work we've tried to work in that field, but the definition keeps expanding because early on the people aspect of it wasn't as really as much of a part of that definition, and so we're evolving as we thought, hey, we got the vineyard certified. Well, that's not even close to organic. That's not even close to being there in terms of the endless pathway towards this sustainability, or just basically doing better for, if just to really get down to the basics, this is about doing better. And so we are at a funny part in our little family winery business in the sense in that we have kind of gotten over the hump in terms of surviving as a business, and it's like, the business actually is probably going to survive. So now maybe we can quit sort of like focusing on what's right in front of our faces and get back to that original vision, but with a much more modern and current, I guess, definition of sustainability that we're still working on learning. And just the pledge that I love the pledge that you sent out, because things are changing very fast, and there's a lot of new definitions that, for me as a 51-year-old who's fairly insular here in this wine growing community, that I haven't been up on as much of a lot of the ways of looking at things and ways of approaching the problem, framing the problem, and understanding. And so the pledge has so much definitions in the front part of it that I found it incredibly valuable. So and we said, wow, we're 25 years into sustainability and we're just barely getting started, basically. Yeah. So in one sense, it's overwhelming. On the other sense, it's exciting though, because we're not going to get bored anytime soon.
No, we won't. We won't. And I don't think that we're going to be, definitely over the next 80 minutes or so, I don't think we're going to be bored either. So let's just get right into it, because there's so much to discuss. And Charlie, the first question or topic of discussion really is directed toward you. So what is the relationship of the forest to water usage?
Well, we can't talk about water without talking about forests, because forest trees are what draws the rain from the sky. It's also what holds the water in the ground. So as far as replenishing the aquifers, maintaining the riparian corridor for the rivers and creeks, that's a really important part. Trees give us oxygen and water.
Those are the two bases of most life forms on the earth. So what's happening with the wine industry, of course, they're wiping out the forest. Without forests, we can't have oxygen. We don't have air to breathe. We don't have water. And that's where the desertification, like happened in North Africa, Egypt used to be all forested. And then they were cutting down the trees to build. And then that sort of creates its own climate change, is the lack of trees. And that's what's happening through most of Northern California, especially in the Napa and Sonoma valleys, very severely. So we're moving into a mega drought. We are in the middle of we don't know if it's the middle. We hope it's the middle and not the beginning, because there's droughts archaeologically as long as 60 years in California through geological testing. So if you think we're at the beginning phase of a mega drought, we've created that ourselves by, ignoring the forests. And a tree or a group of trees like behind Steve, that's not a forest. That's a few trees. A forest is a whole ecosystem that's really essential to water. Without the trees, we don't have water. Without water, we don't have trees. They both are connected. Thank you.
Sure. Okay.
I'm glad the cat has joined us. I have to say something about your cat, Steve.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, if we're lucky, my cat might make a cameo too. Okay, but right now he's terrorizing our neighbors outside. So Steve, this question's for you. So what is the relationship of the forest to vineyards?
Okay, so there's this idea within farming that a healthy, I don't know if this is the best way of putting it, but a sick farm sucks energy, a healthy farm radiates energy. So this idea of so there's energy that moves around. But you can look at it ecologically and say it's carbohydrates and beneficial uses of insects. I mean, there's ways of defining energy, but basically, sorry, the cat is
Hold on
super
a
annoying.
second,
So the
Steve, the sound is going like, I mean, there are times when you're more clear and sometimes you sound like you're further away.
okay, let me see if I can set this here. So the way I
That's
see
better.
the way we see it, a forest in relation to there's like close proximity and more meta stuff, right? Like, so Charlie's talking about rainfall, and like really there's a lot of meta stuff with the whole forest from the standpoint of how the forest draws in rain, and how and water is then can get into the ground and not run off, and then can get re-released at other times of the year. And so I look at that in relation to vineyards as our whole area. But then there's also in closer proximity you have forest, and it's really important from a pest management standpoint, and just just an overall health of your vineyard standpoint, to have that healthy forest. That's because all the beneficial insects come out of the forest. There's competitive fungi coming out of the forest. It's a real problem that in agriculture for so many years thought we needed to wipe out all of the living stuff around the field so that weeds and pests wouldn't come in, and it's exactly the opposite. It's that we get a lot of benefit from the forest. And here within vineyards, we try to plant hedgerows. We try to take a fence line and say, change the mindset. A fence is not a management problem that needs to have the weed sprayed along it. A fence is an opportunity to plant native plants along it, and allow some of the forest life to come a little closer to the vineyard along a little corridor that you've created. And so the way I see forest as a around vineyards is a repository of life that we have to figure out how to draw it and allow it to move closer to the land that we're farming.
So let me just ask sort of a follow-up to that, and this is for both of you. How have the wildfires that we've been experiencing over the last few years, and that it's predicted that this is going to be the new normal, at least for the foreseeable future, how is that impacting the forest and water and the vineyards all together? Because as you said, it's all interrelated. But what are some of the specific ways that the fires are having an impact? And I know, Charlie, we've spoken about this before, about how the fires actually, it's a way of the earth healing itself.
The earth healing, right.
Yeah.
And that's what, so it's not that it's hard to say which started which, but I believe it's the droughts, that we the two-leggeds have sucked too much water out of the ground. If you go up, like in Napa Valley, you go up to Lake Hennessy, which is the water supply for Napa. That creek used to be a full running creek. And just this last year, and right now we're in January, it's dry. It's almost dry. It's just a trickle. It's not even water. And the Napa River, to a stranger, it looks like a creek, not a river. And a river, just like what Steve was just describing, the forest being this huge ecosystem of life, the rivers and the waters are the same thing. In fact, they are the life-giving. We can't live without water. And there's been that disregard in the industrialized mindset in the wineries. I know in the early 70s is when I moved to Napa Valley, and they used to leave the trees, the oak trees, the walnut trees around, and that created shade for the vineyard workers, which was an important thing. But it seemed like it got more and more industrial as the decades passed, so that now it's almost like a military unit, that they just cram in as many grapes as they can with nothing else around it. And that lack of forest, then that cuts down the rainfall. Our rainfall has been steadily decreasing this last decade. The headwaters, which are in the more northern parts of California where the water comes from. And when we say the headwaters, we literally mean the head. It's like the brain of the water. It's where the water starts. It's where the water's born. And then it extends to the body out. And then you can say, okay, well, we're not going to put water to this arm. We're going to put it all to this other arm. Well, if you took all the blood and just it to one arm, this other arm would atrophy and have to be amputated. And that's what we've done with the Northern California water systems, just redirected them in a way that's unsustainable. And unfortunately, this decade now that we're in, we're good 15 years into unsustainable practices, and we are running out of water. So that's just a real severe crisis.
What, when you say 15 years into unsustainable practices, do you mean that 15 years?
If we would have started conserving and stopping this militarized view towards farming, the kind of agribusiness, turning into a business instead of a livelihood. When you think of a livelihood, it's life for the sort of sentient life, the four-leggeds and the, all the insects and beneficial microbials under the ground, in the ground, all of those things. But that total disregard for it, we basically just start cutting off our appendages. We've cut off, the headwaters are going dry. They never used to go dry. In the tens of thousands of years that indigenous people lived in California, the headwaters always had water because that's where the water is born. That's where it starts from. But we're not only just taking away the forests that bring the rain and hold the rain, we're sucking it up from under the earth, so the aquifers are going dry. And that's why the fires we had this last summer, where the lightning touched and it literally just exploded because the groundwater is all sucked up, it's exploding into fire. And so that's the fire's way, that's the earth way of telling us as two-leggeds, you guys are done, you're done. The earth has been telling us that, but now it's telling us it's kind of like yelling. It's like when you're a child and you're misbehaving, the mother's like, okay, honey, just come over here. They try to redirect you, the flooding. Oh, you're not supposed to build your houses along the riverbanks and close to the ocean. Oh, don't put your houses on cliffs because that's like, but now what's been happening the last 2 years, 3 years, the mother is screaming at us, you must stop what you're doing. So that, that's what's happened. It's hard to say which started which, but I really think it was the deforestation, the rapid use of water, using water faster than any species has ever done on this earth before, is creating the fires. And the fires are a result of that. But fires come seasonally. That from the indigenous perspective, the people that lived here maintaining the land, and I think that's the mythology that there was a discovered wilderness. It wasn't a wilderness, it was a maintained, sustainable, organic, farm to table, whatever you're going to say, all those good words that we put to food and wine is what the indigenous people did. But every square inch of California was touched by human hands. It was fully inhabited. Napa Valley is the oldest continuously inhabited place in North America. There was villages, people living in permanent villages, and they were hand tending all the land. So when you take out the stewards, you take away the gardeners, and then you have these small children come in who just think they're in a playground. It's a wilderness. It wasn't a wilderness. It was a maintained agricultural preserve. And then they took all the elements. The first thing removed was the oak trees. The oak trees were the essence of the water supply and the earth supply and the food supply here in the Napa Valley. So now we're just at this place of unsustainability. It's hard to say which came first, but even before that, fires would come, but because the forests were tended, they wouldn't rage like they do. There's certain trees, really old forests, the heart of the forest, they need these intense heat right now that the fires have been given to germinate. So that's the earth saying, oh, you took away all the ancient old trees that lived thousands of years all over the state, all over the Northwest, Southwest. They've been removed. So the earth is saying, nope, those trees need to come back. That's the heart of the forest. That's the key to water. And so replanting trees is the worst thing you can do after a fire. And then it's kind of like people think, oh, there's not the manpower. But then you think, well, do you want to continue to live in this part of the world? Or do you want to say we can't maintain the earth the way it was maintained for tens of thousands of years?
So Charlie, just to clarify, you said that replanting trees is the worst thing you could do, but then it's also, there were the trees, the oak trees, the old redwoods, that many which have been cut down, that were sustaining the forest for so many years and providing this equilibrium in the ecosystem. So you don't, I know that I'm not sure what the feasibility is of planting redwoods and oaks, and those are.
Well, you wouldn't plant them, but see, that's the part that the industrialized farmer, the modern mind, all of us, me too. Right. I'm getting this information from tribal elders, California elders, and I forgot to identify myself that I'm native to New Mexico. So I actually, my early childhood and my indigenous background is from New Mexico. So I grew up in a desert environment, and then the populations were very small, and water was very sacred. It was used all through my childhood. It was like that. But in California, the part that people will have trouble understanding is that you don't just not plant trees and let everything come up. You would go and you would be thinking of every square inch. And that's the part where people are going, no, we're not going to touch all the earth. They want to bring in a tractor and mow it all down or plant it all up and planting it with tractors. And so that's the mindset that really will be forced to change. I just believe that we will be forced. So I always think that we should change before we're forced. And just realize that it could be, it's a high labor, people wouldn't have 20,000 acres because if they had to touch every inch of it. And the tribes are ready to do that. Tribes in California still have the knowledge. They still want to be, as they say, released from their reservations, which used to be called concentration camps. Tribal people until just really recently, but till 1978, were, if they left their tribes, they were arrested or killed up until really modern times. And so the tribal people still are not free. They don't want to own the land, but they want to tend the land. As their one elder, Ron Good, he's from the Mono Band of I forget the name, North Fork Band of Mono down in Central Valley. And he's kind of one of the tribal water experts, speaking to the state, the governor, and the tribes have been trying to speak to the Euro invaders really since they came. But there wasn't the dialogue. It just wiped the population out. And now the survivors still have the knowledge and have been offering it and want to offer it. But what he said at this one tribal water summit in Sacramento 2 years ago, we don't want to be consulted and teach you how to do it. We want to be hired to do the work. We want to be freed from our reservations and be doing the work because we know how to do it. We want to do it. We are willing to do it. And so I think that's the place where the mindset hopefully will change.
Yeah. So actually that leads me to the next question, which is how is the water shortage impacting the indigenous communities? And I know everyone is being impacted or most of us are being impacted one way or another, but especially I know that there are, especially on, within the tribes, there are specific problems, especially because of the level of poverty that's often there too.
Right. And a lot of those things are changing. The native world, they survived the genocides, but that the population was reduced about 95% here in Napa Valley, most of Northern California, probably San Francisco, Sonoma, Marin, in about 25 years of Euro invasions. The populations, the thousands and thousands of people that lived here were nearly wiped out. And then the survivors were forced into marginalization. But the resiliency of tribal people that now they're actually thriving. And the younger tribal people have adapted and changed and got their university degrees. We're all speaking English and articulate. But the hardest thing for the tribes, like if we look at the tribes in the remote rural parts, that's where the headwaters are. And probably about 8 years ago, I was at a water summit in Sacramento. It was a statewide water summit. All the legislators were there from the state, governors. The governor wasn't there, but a lot of the state senators and House of Representatives, they were all there represented in groups of panels, and then they would open it up. There was about a 300-person audience. Mostly water experts, but at one point, they would open the microphone after every panel, and I said, I'm really concerned. You're talking about water, but you're not mentioning the headwaters. And the one state legislator from Los Angeles, and I'm really bad with names, of course, I forgot his name, but he said, oh, we're not talking about the philosophical or the poetic water up in the mountain. We're talking about the water that's right here in the river. And my response to him was, duh, where do you think that water comes from, sir? It comes from the headwaters. And I said, I think there's 7 headwaters in Northern California. I know the 3 of them that have been going seasonally dry for the last 10 years. And then when I spoke, we just had a few minutes to have our Q&A. I was approached at the break by 4 other tribal people that were in the audience. It was a big audience, but they came up to me and they said, thank you so much for talking about the headwaters, because our headwaters, the Klamath, the Eel River, the 2 Forks of the Eel, they're all going dry, seasonally dry, which they've never done in the history of the last 50,000 years. And so that's a bad thing. That means the water is disappearing, and the water that's being used is being poisoned because it's so low. It becomes toxic rather than life-giving. So it's not a good thing. But the other tribal people, a lot of California Indians are very shy. And so they approached me and they said, thank you for bringing it up. But that whole day workshop, I was the only one kind of bringing up the tough questions, about conservation and really changing the way we're using water statewide.
Yeah. Well, so would you say, and this is, I want to, just to tie this a little bit into the wine industry too, because we know, and I've been trying to find out the current like current information about how much water the wine industry in California uses, or even just in Napa? I know it's a lot, but I haven't been able to find out. But would you say, and this is a question for both of you, that grapevines are an invasive species?
Steve, why don't you go ahead? I talked the first one. You take this
one. Well, I mean, invasive in the sense that they've been brought in and are taking up space. I think of invasive species as a little bit of a different in that they kind of go on their own. It's like Pandora's box has been unleashed into an area, whereas in this case we have the ability to rein it in and we can choose as a society to decide how much the vineyards will spread. So it's so that's nice in the sense that we still have that ability. You know, in Napa, it has slowed way down in terms of the spreading of the vineyards. You know, it's compared to the Wild West and, you know, mid 90s, we have the hillside ordinance. We have a lot of regulations around planting of vineyards that were pretty thought out and pretty argued over. And I think you could argue that they could be stronger, but at least we have some framework here. And so, you know, it really comes down to this cropping patterns. I think that here it's vineyards, but cannabis could be a fairly invasive species also in our particular area in terms of environmental degradation. Other parts of the country, it's other crops. There's a bigger picture here of how do we choose to plant our crops and use and take land away from wild land and turn it into a farm, which by definition is going to be way less in terms of biodiversity and habitat value than wild land. And so there's a big social question in terms of finding that balance. It's a little bit frustrating because it's not really addressed socially right now. It's addressed through capitalism, and it's sort of like, okay, well, I got the money and I got the land, so screw you. And so we're going to have to evolve past that into a society that looks at a lot of considerations, I guess.
Yeah, and I think invasive means it's not indigenous, and some of the grapes were indigenous here, but they were part of all the other plants. I think the two-leggeds are the ones that made it be invasive. It's humanly spreading and invasive, where it's a monocrop, which is really harmful to all the life forms within the area. It's been allowed to, you know, when I was teaching preschool kids, and this is probably about 20 years ago, and I was talking about the indigenous lifestyle and how they didn't hunt and gather. That makes it seem, and that's that myth that they were just wandering about. And when the Europeans discovered it, they moved north. You know, that's what I used to hear in the early 70s here. And that's not what happened at all. But they were maintaining a wildlife preserve, but that they would just go out and gather their food and eat it and, you know, spend most of their time singing and dancing because it was so beautiful. And there was plenty of food and water, you know, compared to like areas like New Mexico or Arizona. And then this one child had I was going there every Monday for half an hour because they were preschoolers, but one of the kids had a vineyard and they said, oh, let's go. It's a camp. It was a village site. So we did a field trip there. And unfortunately, they had just stripped the land, stripped it completely. What they used to do, that was back in the 80s, was the routine. They would just strip every living thing. Then they would poison everything and cover it with plastic for 2 weeks to a month, so that every possible, all the way down to the microbials, were killed. And so when the children came and I said, well, we won't be gathering lunch today. And I said, it's like somebody came in and they ripped off the skin of the mother. They pulled her hair out, they took off her skin, and she's here just exposed. And all of us were crying. The mothers were crying, the kids were crying. And I told the story of the Euro invasions. And this one little girl in front, she's like, could you tell the story again? And I'm like, no, I can only tell that story maybe once a year. But they had a really harsh lesson of what was happening there. And everybody felt really sad about it. And the parents were like, how can we not do this anymore? And I think there's been a gradual move, but not not quick enough to not just strip the land of all its life force and then plant something else. That's what's invasive. That's what's harmful. The process, not the plant itself.
Yeah. I mean, there's now more of a move toward polyculture, you know, and I see more and read about more wine wineries doing that. Even some of the bigger wineries are starting to do that too. But when I go to when I go up to see friends who live up in St. Helena, and from up in and the wine country anywhere, Sonoma or Napa, I look at the vineyards, and even the ones that say CCOF, that that are certified organic, and it still looks to me like it's just like there's monoculture. And I guess this goes back to what you were saying before. It's about capitalism and what is considered the most, the crop that is going to be the most profitable. And I've had discussions with some other winemakers around the time of the fires, and there are a few people, and they said to me, like, don't use my name when I'm telling you this, but they're like, there's too much wine in California, especially they said, like, and there's way too much Pinot Noir, which is, yes, Pinot Noir is a hard, it's difficult, it can be difficult to make. It's not as productive of a crop as some other types of grapes. On the other hand, how many $60 or $75 Pinot Noirs do you really need? And it sounds like there's concern that there's so much land that's under vine. There's too much land under vine. There's too much land under vines that, like Pinot Noir, that are just like way too expensive, and that there needs to be a reckoning with this too. And Steve, I mean, I'm going to assume you might have some thoughts on this, although maybe I shouldn't assume, but I'm going to ask you what your thoughts are on that.
On whether we need another expensive Pinot Noir.
Well, no, I mean, let's just be, well, okay. Let's not, like, let's just not dump on Pinot Noir, okay? But just in general, do we really need to be planting more? And this is, again, like with the fires over the last few years, and where some, it's some wineries have burnt down, there are vineyards that have been impacted by this. Should we be replanting? Should we be rebuilding?
Well, yeah, there's for one thing, there's this myth within the wine industry that lower yields equals higher quality. Mm-hmm. And I find that to be a shame, because that means that we have more vineyard land than we need for the right amount of wine. And so, like, so part of sustainability is, if you're going to be farming and you're going to take that land and create a monoculture in it, then you like to use the least amount of land possible to meet the needs of the people, right? And so artificially low yields it really bothers me, because it's such a waste of land and resources. The vines we should be able to give you what they can give you, and so you need less of them. So there's that. There's also, how can we allow habitat into the vineyards? So if the vines are on that land, how can and so here, I'll show you guys in behind here what we're trying to do. And it's a work in progress, but we have oak. There's an oak tree, and so this would have naturally been an oak savanna in this little pocket in here. And so what I'm trying to do, we're letting all the oak trees. We're trying to do our best to let the oak trees come up all along the edges, but in the middle, it's I'm calling it a vine savanna. And so we planted California native grasses, deep, Malati fescue, blue wild rye, California brome, these native grasses that are deep rooted perennials. And so I'm trying to establish a savanna, at least in here. We don't have the oak trees, we have them on the edges, but at least you have the grasslands. And so you try to find a compromise position, so that, yes, from a purely ecological standpoint, we'd rather just have the oak trees, but we are farmers and we're trying to grow fruit, so I'm trying to find a compromised position. And so, so a vineyard isn't just a vineyard. Basically, it's how do we work with vineyards in the landscape, basically, so that we're mitigating and trying to restore the best we can. Get the sun in there, sorry.
Yeah. So this is kind of a good segue into the next issue slash question, which is really, it's a two-part question, which is it fair to tell people that they cannot start wineries because of water usage, because we have the shortage? If people have a winemaking dream, as a lot of people do. I'm sure a lot of people or a number of people who are listening in right now who may already have wineries or might aspire to. But the other side of that is it's not just about water storage, but should people feel entitled to their winemaking dream if it involves using stolen land and harming the environment? So whoever wants to speak to this first, go ahead.
I'll go ahead and speak to it. I think that water and air are the essence of life. Without those two things, we can't live. If you were just drinking wine, you would get sick and die. You have to drink water. And then we wash with water. I think the most important harm that the vineyards do and the wine production does is they look at water as a waste product. Yeah. Rather than a sacred living being. As Indigenous people, we see the water as a living being. When we say one water, one earth, one fire, one tree, one air, there really is only one water. The earth doesn't reproduce water. People think that somehow that more water comes from the sky, but that circle of water, the water that falls from the sky and the trees call it from and holds it in the earth, and then it evaporates to the sky. There's only one water on this earth. The earth is not producing more water. So we can have that egotistical thing, but it's like saying, okay, I'm just going to cut my foot off because I don't really need it. I could drive my car and I'll just cut the foot that doesn't press on the gas and I'm not really, we can cut off our hair, we can cut off our nails, we can't really stop using water. So to not limit the vineyards, and in Western Europe, they did that. The reason the wines in France and Italy are so precious is they limited. They have forests. You can go to a fully inhabited place, but there's forests are still in place. They limited the wineries, they limited the vineyards, and the value and preciousness of the commodity went higher. And so I think that it's kind of self-defeating just to say, oh, everybody in the world can come here to Napa Valley or to Sonoma Valley and have their winery. It's just not a realistic choice. And that's the way that we're going. The county supervisors, the leadership have been allowing that for, I think, really since the 1970s. It's just become a one-way street, that everything's rubber stamped and it's not sustainable, which means it reaches an end. And then what happens is what we're looking at right now. A destruction of the total ecosystem so that this whole region will be uninhabitable to any living people, not just to ourselves, but to all the life forms, the coyotes, the worms, they all have to run as fast as they can and they're being wiped out quicker than anything. They were saying that, we should cut all the forests because that's what's burning. But now the vineyards are burning. And then they don't realize, well, if we cut all the forests, there won't be water. So this will not be a life-sustaining environment. Why would we do that? Why wouldn't we limit it? There's no reason not to.
Okay. So Steve, do you have any thoughts on that, or? So I want to talk about solutions and what we can do and what people can do on an individual basis and also with their businesses to help conserve and I guess recycle water and become more aware of the problem. So so let's just get to that. So yeah, what are the solutions? I know that Charlie, you've talked about that Monterey County has done some things, and I apologize. I didn't realize there's going to be construction nearby. It sounds like a chainsaw. But yeah, what has Monterey County done? Is that something that could be replicated in other parts of the state?
Well, what the state was going to do, and I talked a lot about my background around state water issues that I've been working on for the last 10 years at state levels. I was appointed to the Low Income Oversight Board and was educating the California Public Utilities Commission, which governs water, gas, electricity, and phone. And Monterey, 10 years ago, realized that they're not in the Bay Delta water supply link, so that they had to establish their own water systems and that they were going dry. So the first step they did, and Australia did a similar thing. Australia was facing a mega drought. And at the very first part of the drought, they did the same thing Monterey mimicked that. Public education about the importance that water is a sacred resource that is limited. It is not a waste product. So they immediately put the money into educating the public about massive conservation, but the ones that have to change and conserve are the industry. You know, PG&E, the phone companies, the wineries, hotels, those are the industries that have to go into massive conservation. But the first thing they did is they made it illegal. Any outdoor water usage had to be recycled. So then Monterey County changed their whole water systems. They had the taxpayers' money. They changed the water systems. All gray water was recycled, you know, cleaned and recycled. So they stayed green during this mega drought that California's in. Monterey stayed green. Their agricultural industry, their tourist industry has not been harmed. But then we have to, the key to it is to stop looking at water as a waste product. And then, so for cleaning out the wineries, to cleaning out the barrels, all that stuff, I think that the average winery is using 3,000 gallons of water a day. And I think there's over 700 wineries in Napa Valley. So then you times that by 3,000, that's a day they're using. And the water supply is just going, it's just disappearing because we're just really flushing it down the toilet, literally. And so the massive conservation only, and then dry farming, you'd start out with dry farming. And I think all the things that we're talking about, when you have that cover crop, that conserves water, it protects the soil. You know, you allow the forest to be there. Again, the shade is one of the easiest forms of conservation, but that we stop using outside watering would reduce water usage in the state of California 60%. And that's possible just by reworking all the water systems and making, you know, setting up a different water system that collects some rainwater, but then also recycles all the gray water. And that's the biggest thing. And then just massive conservation that everybody, despite their income levels, can only use so much water. Everybody's limited. And when you pass that limit, and the state was really close to doing that. But like I said in our earlier conversations, Governor Brown didn't want to let the public know how severe the crisis is in California because they were afraid of mass panic. So the public is not being educated, and water usage, wasting this water. And I thought, we're in a mega drought. Every minute that we don't start addressing the problem with solutions, massive conservation, massive public education, and then the way that we grow everything, you know, using mulch and compost and green cover. Those are all ways that enrich the soil, conserve water, preserve water. And then we have to have limits on how much water we're taking from the ground, because the aquifers actually hold mass. And we saw that in the Napa earthquake, that some of those aquifers are so drained that when we had the earthquake, they're sinkholes. They just collapse into themselves. So, you know, that's what I think, that's the one that California has a county that implemented the program. It's working. All their agriculture, they're just going right ahead. Everything's green, but they are using composting, green mulch, all of those things, shade, you know, trees to shade, what's that called? Evaporation. You know how we take all the water that's in the ground and we put it in these big reservoirs and we just put it there to evaporate, you know, we're basically all of those things would have to be re-educated away. But I think most people, given the severity, if they really understood the severity of the problem, the severity of the crises that we're in, they would be happy to change. We would be doing it. I believe it, but I'm an optimist. So those are my thoughts, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you just said. The earthquake, it was terrible because we were overdrawn on water in the groundwater, and then the earthquake closed those pockets. And we've seen wells in the earthquake ban from Carneros up along like Dry Creek Road have never recovered, even when we had the rainy years, because the voids aren't there anymore under the ground. And those, you know, and that's tied into the rivers and streams, because the water should be flowing underground and keeping the Napa River going. It's really tough, and it's really tough because of our water laws are so bizarre here in California, and it's not a level playing field. So any restrictions that get applied only get applied to the new wells and not to the grandfathered wells. So it becomes like the story, the tragedy of the commons, you know, where you don't want to be the one person that conserves because everyone else is going to use it. And so you're just hurting yourself, and it's not a level playing field where we're all conserving equally, and then you can know what you have and you can plan for it, and you know that your neighbors are conserving too, and we can try to better steward this precious resource. And so we have to get out of this mindset So if I got my water, the next guy that comes along is going to be subject to restrictions, but not me. We all need to just kind of grow up and say, how can we just all come up with, accept a reasonable restriction on everybody, and safeguard this precious resource. It's really scary right now.
It's definitely getting scarier by the day, these 80-degree temperatures in January. And again, going up, I just drove up Sage Canyon Road, past, I guess it's called Moore Creek. I'm not sure what the creeks are called, the different places, but it's the main feeder. Puda Creek is the main feeder out of Clear Lake into Lake Hennessy, which is the water supply for Napa. And that's down about 20 feet, and we're in the middle of the winter. And then, like I said, that one creek, the whole time I've lived here since 1972, I've never seen it. It's almost dry. The water's not moving. And so we're at a really, really critical phase right now. We are high level critical. And so the reason the fires are exploding, because anybody that was watching those fires in St. Helena and Pope Valley, that was not, there was nothing normal about it. I mean, they were like explosions. It was like bombs going off. And the ground was literally exploding because it's so dry. And so we are really kind of at that point I can't believe that people aren't demanding to be conserving water. I think some of us are. Unfortunately, I think there's over 32 lawsuits against Napa County supervisors right now about the water management, specifically the denial and the denial to take any action towards sustainability for our survival. It really is our survival. We can live, what is it, 3 or 4 days without water, or 2 weeks, or 2 weeks without food, 3 days without water, and about 10 or 15 minutes without air. And those are all the things that are at risk now. You can't breathe. Those firestorms where no life form could breathe, we're not surviving. And just like in Mississippi, where the river was flooding and people were built up right to the banks. Well, then when it flooded and stayed flooded for over a month, and they moved all those cities away, we're not supposed to build by the riverbanks. And Napa, California still doesn't have that lessons. And unfortunately, what they're doing is just each county is deciding. And when I started going, not from the global perspective it's a global water crisis we're in, but when I just decided at this point in my life, I wanted to focus again locally, and started going to the county water meetings, they only look at the water as if the water does not flow through the whole state, through the whole continent, all the way to Mexico. And it comes really, a lot of our underwater comes from Canada. That they just look at it with the county boundaries, and you can't talk about the headwaters. You can't talk about Clear Lake. It's like, but that's where the water's coming from. So that's a really, really immature, very limited, ignorant basis. And that's where I still think the solution is mass education, really rapidly. You need to start mainlining it.
Yeah. So here, and Steve, here's a question for you that's also, and this is something that actually Megan, I know, add this, because especially with small wineries that have limited financial resources, especially right now with the economic climate we're in, sometimes there are the great intentions, but then it's also like what can you can't always do everything you want to do. So the question that Megan posed was like, how can wineries stop turning water into wastewater, without a ton of investment money? Like how can you do that?
Real challenge, because we have all these, for new winery permits, the same problem. We have grandfathered versus new permits, right? So it's not a level playing field. But for new permits, there's a lot in Napa. There's a lot of this talking about Napa because we're more regulated than a lot of the other counties, and we have a lot of regulations around how much water a new winery can use. But what happens is exceptions get made so much of the time to a lot. So the enforcement of it is spotty because you get so many inspections, but it's still, these regulations are really important to protect the area around the winery from the winery. But then you have another set of regulations around wastewater, because so much of the winery water is used for washing. The vast majority of winery water is used for washing, and it's perfectly good water. And it's very onerous to get through the regulatory process of how to be able to reuse that water. And so in this particular case, the regulations are to protect people from bad water, and I get it, but it really is a major problem for a small winery because it's so expensive to hire the engineering and all of the different treatments to be able to turn that gray water into something that you don't have to sort of be scared of. I mean, this stuff, I don't know if it dates back to like the days of cholera and typhoid and stuff, but it's like, water that you wash a tank down from is not scary water that's going to get somebody sick, but yet we treat it that way. And so just, like I used to geek out on reading like permaculture magazines and think, oh, how cool would it be to have that water we wash go into a pond that then we could have some fish in, and then that could run down into a little wetlands and have habitat. And unfortunately, we can't do that right now because it's so highly regulated, and so that's frustrating. And the cost is just tremendous to process the water. So on the regulatory side, there could be a lot that could be done to help with small wineries on water use. With other sustainable agriculture, it again becomes problematic. The nice thing on this there are some good grant programs for like planting hedgerows or planting cover crops or using compost. And so as a small producer, it's hard to find the bandwidth to write the grants, but the money is there. So like, for example, we got a $30,000 grant from the state of California, part of the Healthy Soils initiative, I think it's called, to plant cover crops and pay for compost and pay for hedgerows. And so it's great, but it took Jill 4 days to get through all that paperwork. And she worked at a nonprofit for 12 years. And so she knows her way around a grant. And so it's pretty unrealistic for somebody who's owner operator with this tiny little business to try to figure out how to navigate that system. But at least that money is there. So there's a lot that can be done just in terms of eliminating roadblocks to facilitate small people to be able to do things.
I'll mute myself. It looks like the construction has stopped for a little bit anyway. Yeah, are there any grant programs that you could think of off the top of your head? Any organizations that are doing it?
There is still, I believe they still have money.
Who is it? I'm sorry.
It's with the state of California.
Yeah.
With the there, as part of like Obama's stimulus package, there was money for organic farming, but the last 4 years we haven't had money for organic farming, so hopefully we're going to get that back again. But the water waste, being able to reuse gray water is such a key for reducing water use in wineries, and grants would be so great on that front, and just loosening grants for the high-tech stuff so you can bring that water right back into the winery, but also just loosening some of the regulations on the low-tech stuff where you can just use the gray water. Why would we? It's insane to me to be getting rid of our gray water and then using good clean water to water the landscaping, for example. And so we need to loosen some of that up, and change the whole definition of landscaping as well, because why do we have lawns? And there's just a whole lot of just a simple mind shift in terms of fitting into our environment with what we consider beauty.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest thing, is just what is sustainable, because it's not really that expensive. With beneficial microbials, they start regenerating themselves. When you have the right ecosystem, you don't have to plant anything. When you create the beneficial area, the seeds come in the wind. And the land project that we have up in Pope Valley, that's what we've been doing, is just looking, and again, just like hand weeding the beneficial plants that we want, the madrone, manzanita, the yarrow, the medicine plants, and the food plants for the indigenous people that they came. We didn't plant. People say, oh, you put all these manzanitas in. We're like, no, they came. The birds brought them. And when you allow that to grow, and you're not just mowing everything down and turning it under, the way we talk about it, when the Euro invasions occurred, they turned the land upside down. And the way the indigenous people use it is the land was not turned upside down, literally. It was not turned upside down. And if you don't turn it upside down, it becomes a living ecosystem. And we saw with the pandemic how quickly the natural world, the air and the water, became really clean almost in less than a week. Yeah. And if we started using non-polluting, fuels, and stop sucking up oil because that's polluting the air. And I think that it all, again, to the solution that again, massive education, it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. And the Resource Conservation District here in Napa, and that's Napa County, I believe it's a federal organization. They help the landowners, and I believe every county has one. They help with the funding. They help you relate to find the funds, help you come up with land use plan and water use plan. They were, Napa actually created a watershed plan back in I think it was about 1983. It took 3 years. It became a model for the rest of the United States of maintaining the watershed. And that was a massive public education. And it was done, everybody did it together. I don't think it was that expensive, but it was a little bit expensive. But it wouldn't be, like you said, I think what you mentioned before is to level the playing field. We're all in this together, so it's not putting the burden on the small farmers, but everybody is doing we're changing the whole system collective. Like again, Monterey County did it. The homeowners and the farmers did not have to set up their own systems. The county did it. The county set up all those systems for everybody, and everybody cooperated, that we're all in this together. That's why we always say one earth. It sounds so simplistic, one earth. We don't have a backup planet. There's one water. The water that's here, if we're poisoning it, we don't have to drink we used to say our grandchildren down there in the future, climate change. But what I found on the low income oversight board, that everything the state and the United States projected about climate change, it's now. That those projections were all off. The millions of dollars that was put into those projections, and I saw those studies. I was part of those studies. That they're all skewed. Everything, it's now, it's not sometime in the future, and it's much, much greater than they had even imagined. It's much more severe. And so until we kind of take those blinders off collectively and realize, no, this is how it is, we have to adapt to it and change, or we as a species won't be on this earth. We don't have to protect the earth. She's going to take care of herself. And that's what she's doing right now with those firestorms, those fire tornadoes or fire tornadoes, whatever they're called. And that, I had said that at one of the board meetings. I had people yelling at me. They said, well, what exactly, Board Member Toledo, is your solution? I said, well, there'll have to be mass migrations. And this one person who happened to be the head of the Water Resource Board for the state of California said, you're talking about the LA basin. I said, yeah, all those people moved there in the last 20 years. They're going to have to move away. And then we met quarterly. That's when the firestorm started. So as board members, we could do an introduction. There were 17 of us on a board, day-long meetings. And so we could say something at the beginning of the meeting. We had a minute to just say who we were and what our issue. And I said, given our last board meeting and the, disbelief that people would be migrating, I said, I have to tell you, when those fires were hitting and those storms were coming down those canyons, people were running as fast as they could. And they were this summer too. And at one point you go, okay, this is not pretend. This is not going away unless we change what we're doing right now. And it's we have to make dramatic change. It's pretty dramatic what we're seeing. I mean, 3 months of fires this last summer. We were under duress. We couldn't breathe outside, we had to wear our masks inside and outside, So I believe that that's the motivation, that we have to get the word out, collectively. Okay, if we want to continue living on this earthly plane, we have to just change the way we're doing it, which we can. We can do it. I really do believe we can.
Okay, great. Well, so we're going to start a Q&A in a minute. So if anybody has any questions, there's a little Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. There should be, because I've already seen some people are asking questions. So I think I'm going to have to read them out, but I will let everyone know who sent them, unless you want it to be anonymous. And there should be an option for you to ask a question anonymously if that's what you want. Just real quick, want to say one thing. Suscol Intertribal Council does a lot of great work, and if you go to their website, which I'll post in a minute, you can see all that they do. And if you want to support their efforts, please do. Please make a donation to them. I'll post the link for where you can make a donation as well. But we feel that the Vinguard feels really strongly that nonprofits, those who are doing similar works, we need to continue supporting each other. So we're making a donation as well today. as part of Charlie's honorarium, but it's an organization I think is doing really important work. And you can also check out their YouTube page because there's a lot of great videos on the YouTube page. I've been over the last few weeks going through them, and even the one that on the water symposium that you did that was over 2 hours long. I don't know how many people made it through all of it. I didn't just make it through it, but I was rewinding and re-listening to it. So there's a lot of really great information there. And as I said, I'll post those links. But first, let's get to the Q&A. So the first question is from Lulit, and this is for Charlie. It says, what are the specific reasons that Indigenous peoples prefer to do the forest work rather than teach the method? I can think of lots of reasons in my imagination, but I don't want to assume the wrong reasons.
Yeah, I could see the questions, and they're all really good questions. I appreciate that. Lou, it's a harsh reality. The land was stolen, and it's going to be stolen until there's reparations made. So say somebody comes into your house and kills your family and starts living in your house and says, look, there's all this great food. Look, we discovered this wonderful place and the cupboards are full and there's a refrigerator. Oh, look, there's a TV. This is just so beautiful. We love it. And we call it Chez Malila Mo La La La, it's just wonderful. Then say you manage to be able to live, down the street in a hovel. And the people said, well, maybe we'll let you come, or why don't you teach us how you were taking care of this house so we can take care of it better. It's not going to happen. I mean, they're the carriers of the knowledge. They're the true caretakers of the earth in California. They're still here alive. Why wouldn't you respect them and allow them to do what they were doing for thousands of years? Why would you even question it? I didn't ever think there was enough people. I didn't think there were enough tribal people. And that's when I was hearing it, I was like humbled. I felt really humbled. I thought, wow, here's these tribes. And then you see these young people, these young men, young women, they're like, they want to do the work, they're underemployed, they're marginalized. They're highest ethnic group to be killed by the police of any group in the United States, the lowest life expectancy of any ethnic group in the world. Give us a break. Hire them to do the work. Don't expect to take more from them.
Okay, so thank you, Charlie. Here is a question from Jenna Olson. So she said, we now see that grants for small farms and vineyards like the CDFA's Healthy Soils Grant Program and others are reliant on political support in a given legislative session versus built into a functional structure of statewide policy. Do you imagine feed-in tariff style structures like we've seen at work in Canada's solar policy could be capable of working in California to usher in a statewide transition on some of these water and land use necessities?
Well, I don't know anything about the structure in Canada, but to me, it's just kind of insane that there isn't more public support for better land use. I mean, it's so important all those folks that live in LA. The water is so interconnected. When my wife Jill and I met, we met because she had gotten a grant when she worked at Community Alliance with Family Farmers to help provide information to almond growers. We know how much water almonds use, but almonds also use a lot of pesticides. So this was farmer to farmer sharing network in almond orchards in the Central Valley to reduce their pesticide use. And one of the main funders for the grant, this is in Merced County, but one of the main funders for the grant was the LA Metropolitan Water District, because those pesticides were getting into the San Joaquin River, going up to the Delta, and then turning around and going down to LA. So there is precedent for all those folks in LA that don't want to have to do a big migration back out of there to care about what goes on at the headwaters and everywhere else in this state. And so there's just so much opportunity to work with agriculture to try to solve some of these problems, and forestry and the whole 9 yards. and it's just a huge, currently missed opportunity, but it's there for sure.
So here is a question from Icy Lu from Taipei. So I'm not sure what time it is there, but thank you, Icy, for taking the time and possibly waking up at an ungodly hour to listen in. So for wineries, what are the most effective, impactful ways to conserve water? Is it more in the vineyard or cellar?
Vineyard uses much more water than the cellar in general, and there's more opportunity, I think, to save in the vineyard in terms of saving just a total amount of water. There's in the cellar can save as well, but the vineyards here in Napa, I'm gonna make up some numbers and say that the vineyards probably use 5 times more water than the wineries minimum. There's all so the vineyard, and the nice thing about vineyards is that the grapevines are living, and so they can adapt. And so, one of the things that we've been working on for years now is trying to figure out how to use less water in vineyards. If you can start out from scratch, you have choices of different rootstocks, and so you can kind of try to plant a vineyard that can be dry farmed. It's a little tougher when you have a vineyard that has on a weaker rootstock that is used to getting irrigated, but you can still wean it way back on the irrigation. And then, of course, there's in the vineyard, you have the ability to take care of the soil and not to flip it upside down and try to allow the life to get back in the soil and the soil to get its porosity back again, so that the rainwater all goes down instead of running off, which is really huge. And so there are bigger opportunities in the vineyard, but the way we're gonna have to do it, just gonna be just like climate change. You have to take every opportunity. So you take the big ones, you take the medium-sized ones, you take the little ones. So in a winery, you might be washing tanks all the time. It doesn't mean you don't want a low flush toilet, right? So we're gonna take every opportunity we can. In the winery, there's still opportunity as well, just changing how we wash things down. Why would you hose it down like crazy when you can use a pressure washer that uses a quarter of the water and does just as good of a job? Or how can we reuse our water? How can we rethink sanitation? Can we do it? There's different new ways of using like ultraviolet light to clean a tank instead of having to wash it down with water and the 3-step chemicals. There's or a foaming system where you can just use just a little bit of water and the sanitation can happen instead of hosing the whole thing down like crazy. So we're just going to have to just start to finish conserve every step of the way, and then hopefully the end result is we're in a better position.
Yeah, I agree with that. That definitely the washing down with water is a really waste of water, and that there are so many other ways that could be implemented, just really in a couple of weeks. They're not real high-tech solutions, that we would stop washing anything down with water. Most of the car washes already use recycled water, and then they keep reusing that water but that's a much simpler system. They're in a contained area and they can just clean it and recycle it. But the wineries could be doing the same thing, but I think you would take water out of washing anything down. Again, being a child growing up in the desert environment, every bit of water was very precious to us. But the biggest wastes of water are really PG&E. Like I said before, the biggest use of electricity is the storage and transportation of water. This is in the state of California. And the biggest use of water is the generation of electricity. That's PG&E is still using water to generate electricity. And that's what's actually wasting most of the water in California. So then that's called the nexus of power. If we could just break that nexus of power. And those discussions have been going on for more than 10 years to deaf ears. And unfortunately, a lot of the jobs, those people change. I sat on that board for 10 tough years and just had, for my own mental health, had to step down because it looked like we were making a lot of progress. But then when Governor Brown, was fully appraised of the situation and chose not to cause a mass panic, which I don't think was the right choice. And I thought the new governor would take a more aggressive stand towards conservation because he was fully appraised of it. He knew all of these things that we're talking about, but he hasn't done anything. And that to me is really pretty discouraging. But I think it's the public will. The public will can force change. The pandemic, the rest of the world is changing. We don't hear about it because our media is so censored. But the rest of the world under COVID, they already have universal health care. They already have protected wages. they are all converting, massively converting the UN goal, which all the countries of the world outside the United States and Brazil, I think, are saying that by 2030 that all of the fuels will be sustainable and clean. Sustainable means that they're clean, they're non-toxic, they're non-polluting. That means the end of Monsanto, or Bayer. We would stop poisoning because they're, mulch and compost works to conserve water. It works to energize the system, and then the beneficial microbials clean the water. So I did type into the chat a film that we have where we're actually talking about that we have a video. It's called Sky is the Roof. It's available free to public viewing. And it talks about all these things from Native perspective. The tribes up in the north talking about a lot of the things in much more complex terms than we're talking about now. But the biggest thing is that with the use of beneficial microbials, we can clean the water. And those guys reproduce really rapidly. The reason they're not around as much is because we've killed them, like how the farming, we've asphalted the roads and cemented the roads. But when the earth is free to the sky, it can regenerate itself, like I said, really in weeks. We're not talking years or months. It's the mindset. It's this owner, we're at the apex of evolution and we get to use everything and nobody else can use it. That's a really self-defeating or self-destructive mentality that won't, at one point, because I was working so long trying to get this water education, I finally thought, okay, it's up to the creator. I've done what I could do as an individual human, but then oftentimes it's just allowing more and more people to really, and then it's the public will. The public will can change things very quickly. And most of the world is changed. It's already changed. The United States is the one place in the world that's not changing to all the things that we're talking about, the sharing of resources, food, water, but then also really protecting the air and protecting the trees. Because without that, China and India are just they plan to be totally green within 5 years. Both those mega countries.
Well, let's hope that starting tomorrow, things here start to change. I'm not, I don't see it happening super quick, although Biden is saying he wants to issue a bunch of executive orders and is going to rejoin the Paris Climate Summit, which is a good step. But, I feel like we can only go up from here. So let's see, there's another question from Jana Olson, who is on one of the Vinguard, she's on the Vinguard advisory board and is sort of our resident viticulturist. I've heard vineyards discuss and even establish polycrop structures like orchard and buckwheat crops. Can you share any local projects engaged in additional enterprises in their vineyard systems that are derived from vineyard polycultures?
That's a really good solution I speak to all the time, especially buckwheat. Buckwheat is one of the indigenous grasses and one of the basic foods from the indigenous population, but I don't know anybody who's doing anything about it. It is starting to be wild. I see buckwheat in Pope Valley, and now I'm starting to see in the parking lot what used to be Mervin's is now Coles and is turning into something else. There's buckwheat in the parking lot. So the native grasses will spread again through the wind and the birds, but I don't know of anybody that's doing that. Any place in the state. Hopefully I'm wrong about that one.
We've been experimenting with planting some fruit trees in the vineyard to see if we can get shade and fruit at the same time. We have a little patch with 10 or 15 fruit trees, and I'm curious to see how they do mixed in with the vines. But I've tried planting I tried planting corn and down the vine, in between the vines, and the vines are so strong, the roots are down there and they just suck all the water. The corn couldn't do it. So then I tried, I grew up in Tucson, so I'm a long member of Native Seed Search. And so it's like, well, I have all those desert seeds. And so we planted tepary beans because the tepary beans are an amazing bean that uses very little water. But even the tepary bean had a tough time with it, in between the grapevines. And so kind of haven't figured that one out yet, other than grazing sheep, or in between the vines, could try to just utilize that grass and grow some meat, in the vineyards, but haven't been successful. Other than we're hoping that we're see what the fruit trees do.
And that brings to mind, I realize Harm's Vineyard on Dry Creek Road, they're doing that. They're doing polyculture, and they didn't put the fruit trees in the vineyards, but adjacent. They haven't devoted all their land, and they've left their forest intact, the redwood forests that are up in there shading, and then they put lavender in between or next to. So say it would be a patch of vineyards, and then the orchard, and then lavender. I forget that. I think it's Harm's Vineyard and Lavender Gardens. And I think that Frog Sleep is doing a lot of stuff like that, that allowing the grasses. But I think the one thing that's still being done is that the earth is being tilled, and then that kills all the earthworms, all the little bugs, and then those beneficial microbials. They're microscopic. We can't see them, but they're there. And that's what actually generates life in the soil. And those are really harmed by any kind of inversion of the soil, any kind of taking a shovel and turning it upside down. So with permaculture, the first thing you do is you lay down, some kind of organic matter, and then you start planting in that, and in the organic straw or whatever green mulch you might have, and then the plants start growing, and then you just cut them down. So, but I think the buckwheat would be a really good one, but I know that the farmers were using fava beans and maybe not harvesting soon enough. And then what they would do is tractor them into the soil. Again, that fear of the hand touching the earth or something. There's a phobic of the Euro people to touch the mother.
Well, great. Well, we're kind of getting toward the end here. And this has been a really fantastic discussion. I look forward to watching the recording of it, which hopefully I've tried recording in 3 different ways, so I'm hoping that one of them has worked. We shall see. And assuming that there is a recording, I will be sure to share it with both of you, and to anyone else. We'll post it on Instagram, Facebook, and any other social media sites that we can. Again, not my forte, but I just wanted to quickly say a few things. Again, check out the Suscol website. Check out their YouTube channel, because there's a lot of good information about that. And Charlie has a wealth of knowledge, has done so much, and there's so much that we can learn from listening to the elders and the experiential knowledge that has been passed down, for so many years. As we're talking right now about, what the solutions are, it seems to me like a lot of the solutions are there. They've always been there. They're very, very old. They're ancient solutions. So I would encourage everyone to, and I hate to say this, but don't look so much at UC Davis. Just look at those who have been doing this forever. And hopefully UC Davis and some of the, those who are trying to come up with solutions are talking to the elders and listening to what they have to say. Again, if you can, please try to, if you have the funding, please support Suscol Intertribal Council. Again, they do great work. Also, if you can support the Vinguard, that would be great. I'm going to type in our donation page right now. Your donations help support the Wine Industry Equity Pledge. They help support the upcoming handbook that we're doing, and also support forums and events like this. So I feel right now like I'm working, like I'm a PBS volunteer asking for money, but that's how nonprofits make, that's how we make money. I'm not asking the Koch brothers. I don't think they would fund me. It's the little donors that really that make a difference. And and no donation is too small to count, to be appreciated. I know it's really hard times out there, but if you can help in any way, it would. It's not just me, it's not just the Vinguard appreciating it, but it's everyone else who benefits from the work that we're doing that would appreciate that. So with that, Steve and Charlie, do you have any closing thoughts? Anything you want to say?
Well, I'm an optimist. I always believe that we can do it, and mostly the way two-leggeds seem to operate is that when we come to that edge of the cliff, that, you know, the communities do pull together and help each other. And I want to thank, I see that there's somebody from Argentina. So I don't know how you got the international reach, but that's amazing. I thought it would be more local. And I think collectively really seeing that, again, I can only say it, you know, just almost use it as a mantra: one earth, one water, one air, one fire, and that all life is connected. And without that web being whole and sound, that we all will perish. So either, I think it's all of us or none of us. That's the other thing I say all the time. It's all of us or none of us. But let's just imagine and start to move towards the equity of action. Thank you, Pamela, too, for having us.
Thank you, Charlie. And Steve, thank you so much, too. It's always a pleasure. Whenever I talk to you, I always learn so much about viticulture and winemaking, and I appreciate your wanting to be part of the social and environmental justice movements within the wine industry. And it's especially someone with your platform and your stature, can have a huge influence. So thank you to you and to Jill as well. So really appreciate your being here. And I also would like to thank Megan Bell, who helped shape the discussion a bit. We had a meeting, and that's Megan is from Margins Wine, and her wines are terrific too. So check them out. And yeah, I think that is I think we are ready to wrap it up. Again, everyone, thanks so much. Stay safe. We have like to think that we have a new dawn coming, and let's do what we can to conserve water, and even more than that, to educate ourselves, because when we educate ourselves, it allows us to educate others. So I'm wishing everybody a great evening. I think that for a lot of us, there's a little bit of celebration in the air. We're almost there, and I'll let everybody know about the next forum that we do. Again, if you're interested in finding out about the forums, just shoot an email to info@thevinguard.com. I will real quickly type this in, and I'm sure I would love to have both Charlie and Steve on panels and forums in the future too. So, yeah.
Well, let's hope the new dawn is with us. Thank you so much. I want to thank everybody. I was really impressed that people from around the world came and spent time, and there was a real good questions. The questions were profound and thought provocative. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Pamela.